November 1917. A valley, an event that should never exist in any record. Yet I am telling it now because at 84 years old, a man understands that silence eventually becomes its own form of guilt. My name is Viktor Markov, November 1917. Checkpoint Kastav. I was a junior officer in the Serbian 3rd Mountain Corps, assigned to a forward checkpoint overlooking a narrow supply route through the mountains. 68 soldiers were with me. Our task to establish a forward observation post and monitor Austro-Hungarian movements in the region. We were trained soldiers, men who had already survived years of war, men who were not supposed to scare easily. But before the first week ended, something changed. 6 of the men refused to leave their tents after sundown, faces pale, eyes darting into the shadows. No one explained why the valley had been restricted before our arrival. By the 3rd week, our commanding officer submitted a report so unusual that the military authorities sealed it from the public record for 40 years. And then this happened. 31 days later, only 11 soldiers walked out of the valley, forced to leave everything behind, walking out alive. Before I reveal what happened next, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. 68 men marched up the Vukova Gorge under explicit orders to establish a forward observation post against Austro-Hungarian movements. High command expected 8 weeks, possibly 10. The monthly stipend was substantial. I had a sister in Belgrade with 2 children and no husband. You understand why a man pushes into a frozen wilderness when someone offers him compensation. You understand the mathematics of survival. Colonel Maksim Vranic briefed us the opening evening in the stone command house. 58 years old, a man who had endured the Balkan Wars and carried the 1,000-yard stare of someone who stopped trusting explanations decades before. He presented the situation with bureaucratic precision and zero emotional effect. The valley was strategic. Enemy patrols operated 15 kilometers downslope. We would establish rotating lookout pairs every 4 hours through darkness. We would maintain strict ammunition discipline. We would not abandon the perimeter under any circumstance. He reiterated that final instruction with specific emphasis. 3 times. The reasoning remained unspoken. In military service, you learn that silence around certain rules carries more weight than explanation. Checkpoint Kastav occupied a widened section of the valley floor, perhaps 300 meters across, surrounded by dense coniferous forest that climbed both slopes until altitude defeated the tree line. 2 log structures served as barracks. 1 reinforced stone building functioned as command post and storage. A perimeter fire was maintained at the valley's northern edge. The elevation approached 2,000 meters. Temperature dropped below -8 Celsius by sunset. The wind channeled through the gorge with terrible velocity. We burned enormous quantities of firewood. Sleep came in fractured 2-hour increments. Miroslav Santic worked alongside me during those early rotation assignments. Former forester from eastern Serbia, the kind of man who observed mountain dynamics constantly, not from anxiety, but from professional habit. Wind direction changes, precipitation patterns, animal movement in the higher elevations. He communicated minimally. When he spoke, substance preceded every statement. I respected that quality. Lieutenant Dragan Petrovich maintained the checkpoint log, 34 years old. Teacher by training, round metal spectacles perpetually fogged by mountain cold. He documented everything methodically: weather conditions, supply counts, personnel movements, minor incidents. The log would become the only verifiable record of what occurred. Later, government officials would locate that log and classify it immediately. I glimpsed it once in 1954. An archivist confirmed its existence and promptly terminated the interview. November 4th, the first anomaly. All 6 horses tethered at the eastern livestock enclosure began exhibiting extreme agitation simultaneously. Rearing, pulling at restraints, facing away from the upper valley slopes, ears flattened in pure terror. No external threat was visible. The valley appeared empty. Colonel Vranic examined the animals briefly, stated that altitude stress and unfamiliar terrain caused the behavior. Returned to the command post. Miroslav caught my attention afterward. He indicated through simple gestures that horses didn't panic without legitimate cause. He said the animals recognized something present in those mountains that we couldn't detect yet. He communicated this through expression and posture rather than words. By the sixth night, November 8th, the auditory phenomena commenced. I occupied the northwestern perimeter watch with a man named Radosav Lukic, a former stoneworker from Prizren, whose physical dimensions suggested he could bend structural steel through willpower alone. We positioned ourselves at the northern observation point, separated from the thick tree line by approximately 25 meters. The hour approached midnight. Temperature had descended into dangerous territory. Darkness was absolute. Wind moved constantly through the gorge. The sound originated from deep within the forest canopy, not from a particular location, emanating from the darkness itself as though the darkness possessed acoustic properties. The noise registered below normal hearing threshold, almost below conscious perception, not matching any animal vocalization, not precisely. The sound contained rhythmic intervals, a repeating pattern that approached recognizable structure and then dissolved back into formlessness. Radosav tilted his head toward the tree line. He moved nothing else. Neither of us communicated verbally. We sustained auditory focus for approximately 6 minutes. Then silence returned completely. We reported the incident immediately. Colonel Vranic asked whether we had observed any visible movement. We confirmed negative. He instructed Lieutenant Petrovich to document the occurrence. Unexplained acoustic event, northern sector. Approximately 035 hours. No visual confirmation of source. He returned to sleep. The response demonstrated military professionalism, the correct response from a commander who recognized the necessity of maintaining unit morale through rational skepticism. November 12th, the 9th day into our deployment, Miroslav discovered the prince. He was conducting routine forest inspection at the upper valley perimeter. He returned to checkpoint Kestav with the expression of someone recalibrating fundamental assumptions. He brought Colonel Vranic directly to the location. I accompanied them because Miroslav's gestures indicated I should follow. His instincts possessed consistent accuracy. The impressions existed in a clearing where snowmelt had created soft earth conditions. The tracks displayed bipedal architecture. The stride pattern communicated intentional walking rather than random movement. However, the imprints departed radically from human footwear. The prints extended nearly 40 centimeters in length. The toe spacing separated extremely wide, almost perpendicular to the central arch. Each toe terminated in a deep, narrow puncture depression exceeding the depth of the foot's primary weight point. The heel impression measured shallow. The distance between successive prints approached 1.8 meters. Miroslav's height exceeded normal parameters. His natural stride barely reached 1 meter. Colonel Vranic extracted his field measurement instrument. Length 42 centimeters. Width at toe separation 21 centimeters. Depth at anterior foot 5 centimeters. Depth at heel less than 1 centimeter. He examined Miroslav without reaction. Miroslav studied the forest perimeter. The colonel announced possibly a bear exhibiting bipedal locomotion briefly, as these animals occasionally do. He delivered the statement using the precise tone reserved for topics he had determined not to contemplate further. Miroslav remained silent. He directed his gaze toward me. I examined the prints. The stride consistency between impressions was remarkable. Whatever creature produced these tracks moved with deliberate intention, not with bounding or predatory behavior. Walking along the forest edge parallel to checkpoint Kastov for no fewer than 40 meters, until ground conditions hardened, rendering tracks imperceptible. Walking during hours of darkness based on frost formation patterns within each impression. Walking while surveying our position, I should communicate what the regional inhabitants understood. Approximately 10 kilometers southeast existed the settlement of Donji Morav. When supply expeditions traveled through the settlement, elder men and women observed from structures without acknowledging the soldiers. On one particular occasion, an elderly woman, perhaps 75, intercepted our supply wagon driver Nikola, who maintained fluency in the regional dialect. She communicated that the valley had experienced closure during her mother's lifetime and her grandmother's lifetime for identical reasons. She instructed him regarding the entities occupying the mountains above permanent snowline. She employed the old linguistic term, Vorjulak. She cautioned him that we should depart before the initial severe freeze-transformed ground conditions, because once earth hardened and became inflexible, the creatures descending from the highest elevations could traverse terrain without impediment. She delivered this counsel matter of factly, as though discussing routine seasonal precautions, like advising someone to close windows before winter precipitation arrives. Nikola transmitted this information during the return journey. He presented it as narrative rather than conviction, with a slight shoulder elevation indicating uncertainty. I requested what specific guidance the woman offered. Nikola reported that she had advised immediate evacuation before the first hard freeze. I contemplated her statement extensively. The psychological weight of her words proved difficult to dismiss, regardless of rational skepticism. November 16th, the 13th day of checkpoint occupation, Radosav discovered the animal remains. Location: the western forest perimeter, approximately 28 meters into the coniferous growth. The creature, likely a mountain goat originating from higher elevations, was positioned on its side. No surface blood, no traumatic injuries suggesting violent death. The corpse exhibited complete desiccation, preservation of hide and structural form despite total absence of internal moisture. When Radosav manipulated the body, its weight suggested hollow internal architecture. Consistency of skin stretched across empty framework. Like a leather container stuffed with dried grass, the Conal initiated documentation. Unidentified animal remains located. Western quadrant. Biological origin unknown. He directed Radosav to leave the carcass undisturbed. Stated that scavenging creatures would process it. Dismissed the unit back to operational duties. The tone brooked no discussion. November 18th through 20th, the escalation sequence that I must describe with maximum accuracy because precision represents the singular valuable contribution I can offer at this stage of my life. The acoustic phenomena intensified, emanating from two directions simultaneously, western and northeastern sectors, both at identical pitch frequency, both exhibiting the same nearly linguistic structure. Duration 13 minutes according to Lieutenant Petrovic's chronometer measurement. Miroslav discovered a second set of impressions along the southern checkpoint boundary. Identical morphology. Identical stride mechanics. The creature or creatures had completed a full circuit around checkpoint Kostav while the garrison slept. On the 20th, Private Alexander Gavrilovic, the unit's quietest member, exhibiting no prior indication of psychological instability, reported visual contact during his sentry assignment. He described observing a face at the forest margin during the previous night rotation. The face displayed extreme paleness, sufficient brightness to perceive distinct features through ambient darkness. The figure demonstrated significant height, exceeding the distance between the lowest coniferous branches and soil surface, which Lieutenant Petrovich subsequently measured at 2 meters and 30 centimeters. The eyes reflected firelight from a distance of approximately 60 meters in the manner that filled ocular structures capture and return illumination. He utilized that precise comparison. He presented his report without theatrical emphasis. The unit's response distinguished itself through complete absence of ridicule. Under normal circumstances, and in any conventional location, the garrison would have produced laughter. No audible response occurred. Colonel Vranic conducted a private interview with Gavrilovic lasting 30 minutes within the command post. He emerged unaccompanied. He instructed Lieutenant Petrovich to register the incident as standard sentry report. Possible hostile reconnaissance. Description compromised by darkness and distance variables. He engaged in extended manipulation of his left ear, a habitual gesture signifying deep cognitive processing. Subsequently, he increased the night watch rotation configuration from pairs to groups of 4. He contracted the perimeter observation distance from 20 5 meters to 12 meters from the tree line. 12 meters. The significance of that specification would become apparent only after subsequent events unfolded. The initial hard freeze arrived on November 24th. Temperature descended to -11 Celsius. Earth surface crystallized. The ground achieved hardness comparable to processed iron. I verified this through direct boot, heel contact, and sensory feedback. I recalled the elderly woman's specific warning. Then I deliberately suppressed the memory. This represented the psychological mechanism through which humans reject information that contradicts comfortable worldviews. Compression. Suppression. Intentional mental displacement. That same night, Private Stefan Dimitrovic, 35 years old, former riverboat engineer from Kostolac, was discovered at his sentry position approximately 03:45 hours in a state of unresponsiveness. Conscious, eyes open, seated upon frozen ground, rifle positioned across his knees, gazing northeastward into empty darkness. However, he produced no response to verbal stimulation or physical contact. Respiration patterns remained regular. Pulse continued at reduced frequency but perceptible amplitude. His skin temperature registered substantially below what environmental conditions alone could explain. The left side of his neck revealed 2 puncture lesions, precise spacing approximately 4.5 centimeters apart, diameter slightly exceeding what a large fastening nail would produce. Minimal blood accumulation. The wound margins exhibited pressed down configuration rather than torn outward laceration pattern. Something had applied pressure rather than incisive force. Lieutenant Petrovich measured wound dimensions and recorded all parameters in the checkpoint log. I observed him executing the documentation. I witnessed his hands trembling as he performed the notation. Dimitrovic achieved consciousness approximately 12 hours later. He recollected his sentry rotation initiation. He retained memory of temperature extremity. He maintained awareness of the forest perimeter. Subsequent to approximately 02:30 hours, cognitive gaps appeared. Complete absence of memory. He demonstrated no hysterical response. He consumed evening rations. He sat beside the central fire. He declined verbal interaction with other garrison members. Colonel Vranic issued orders the following morning for Dimitrovic's immediate evacuation to the primary valley settlement, classified as fever-related illness. I never determined what ultimately occurred to him. The colonel provided no explanation regarding the withdrawal or subsequent disposition. The commander escalated watch rotation to 5-person groups requiring continuous perimeter movement. Static sentry positions were eliminated entirely. No soldier permitted to occupy a fixed observation point longer than 90 seconds. He commissioned supplementary kerosene from the supply warehouse. He mandated fires burning at all cardinal direction checkpoint boundaries throughout darkness hours. He transmitted written correspondence to regional military command requesting position reassignment, citing operational constraints and force insufficiency relative to strategic requirements. The response required 5 days, 5 additional days occupying the checkpoint, while we understood something inhabited the surrounding mountains. The administrative reply stated identical content to the initial inquiry. Position retention mandated. Strategic operations continuance required. The colonel read the message twice. He executed careful folder placement. He positioned the correspondence inside his command portfolio. He did not divulge the contents directly to the garrison. Unnecessary communication proved redundant. When a senior officer reads hostile intelligence twice and folds it with that deliberation, every soldier comprehends the answer was absolute refusal. November 28th, 3 simultaneous incidents that I have mentally reconstructed countless times across 68 years, attempting to arrange them into logical sequence. I have never succeeded. The chronology resists coherent organization. At approximately 1700 hours, during twilight but preceding full darkness, all 6 horses tore simultaneously free from their restraint apparatus and executed full gallop flight down the valley corridor toward the settlement. We never recovered them. At 2100 hours, the northwestern checkpoint fire which Lieutenant Petrovich had personally fueled and maintained 70. 3 minutes earlier, extinguished completely. No wind conditions explained the occurrence. The 3 remaining perimeter fires sustained their intensity without disruption. At 22:15 hours, Private Stojan Marinkovic reported from the northwestern observation position that an enormous figure had emerged from the forest darkness into firelight visibility range. Marinkovic maintained a reputation for emotional reserve, 4 years military service, combat experience from the southern campaigns. His reporting employed the structured methodology taught to military personnel. Specific location notation, precise time measurement, duration approximation, comprehensive description protocol. He stated the figure stood motionless at the darkness margin for approximately 48 seconds. Height exceeded 2 meters substantially. Physical posture demonstrated verticality, yet with anterior shoulder displacement that contradicted human skeletal architecture. The entity directed its attention toward the sentry observation position. Movement patterns did not conform to animal behavior. Absence of postural shifts, absence of olfactory investigation, absence of circular approach patterns. The figure maintained static positioning while observing before executing backward locomotion into the darkness. He communicated one additional statement which Lieutenant Petrovich transcribed with word for word accuracy. It was not experiencing curiosity about us. It possessed comprehensive knowledge regarding everything necessary about our presence. I possess awareness of those words across 68 years. The statement resists improvement or modification. November 30th, All Saints observance commemorating the deceased, which represents non-insignificant calendar timing within Serbian Orthodox tradition. Temperature registered -16 Celsius. The sky demonstrated complete atmospheric clarity. Lunar phase reached 3/4 illumination, providing illumination superior to anything experienced during the previous 3 weeks. That brightness produced complications. At precisely 2200 hours on the moonlit evening of November 30th, observation groups stationed at the southeastern and northern perimeter locations simultaneously reported movement in the forest zones flanking the checkpoint. Not a single creature. Both reports confirmed multiple distinct forms navigating between tree trunks at the forest boundary, moving without haste, maintaining parallel trajectories to the checkpoint perimeter. Quantification estimates northern observation reported 3 to 4 distinct shapes. Southeastern group reported minimum 2 separate entities. Movement direction was northward, indicating coordinated flanking patterns around the checkpoint establishment. Colonel Vranic transmitted immediate directives. Every soldier not actively stationed on perimeter observation received orders to arm themselves and assemble in the checkpoint central area. All 4 perimeter fire constructions received orders for immediate enhancement and intensification. 58 armed men positioned themselves in -16-degree conditions, restraining standard issue rifles, while entities in the surrounding forest moved in coordinated patterns around us beneath moonlight. We maintained this positioning for 119 minutes. Verbal communication remained barely above whisper threshold. Subsequently, vocalization commenced simultaneously from multiple forest locations, layering and intersecting, but remaining individually distinct, each producing slightly altered pitch frequency, not howling patterns, not growling vocalizations, frequencies considerably lower, auditory duration considerably extended. The identical, nearly linguistic rhythm we had previously encountered, now containing harmonic layering, multiple pitch registers overlapping in apparent communication structure, as if we represented not the intended receivers of this interchange, but merely the subject material under discussion. That represents the most distressing interpretation I have achieved through reflection, and I maintain conviction in its accuracy. The harmonic vocalization sustained for 7 minutes. Silence followed. Movement in the forest boundary ceased by 0100 hours. Complete quietude. Lieutenant Petrovich enumerated entities through consolidated observation reports. Minimum 5 distinct shapes confirmed through unified sentry testimony. Maximum calculated estimate 11 separate entities. He documented everything. At the entry's conclusion, he inscribed 3 words with double underline emphasis. They evaluated us. I must specify what did not transpire because the distinction carries significance. No fatalities occurred. No soldiers experienced abduction. The entities did not penetrate checkpoint perimeter boundaries. They conducted observation. They executed coordinated movement. They engaged in communication activity. They withdrew systematically. That deliberation regarding approach and withdrawal proved more psychologically disturbing than direct assault would have generated because it communicated explicit meaning. We were undergoing assessment. We were being evaluated. The determination regarding our fate remained unmade. We comprehended this collectively without verbal discussion. The understanding permeated every soldier's consciousness. December 2nd, say, the initial direct encounter. I participated in northwestern perimeter observation within a 4-person rotation group. Temperature measured -13 Celsius. Lunar phase absent. Overcast conditions dominated. Firelight provision served as exclusive illumination mechanism, projecting darkness, pushing capability approximately 13 meters into the forest region. At 00:35 hours, a figure emerged deliberately from the coniferous growth. Movement pattern demonstrated deliberation. It advanced the manner a human traverses a room possessed of complete familiarity. Non-predatory progression. Non-cautious advancement. Purely intentional motion. The entity emerged from between 2 towering pines and positioned itself at the forest margin, achieving firelight exposure. Now within illumination range, partial firelight definition at 13 meters distance. My recollection of what I observed is definitive and crystalline. I perceived extreme vertical extension. Whatever the entity represented, it demonstrated minimum height of 2 meters 70 centimeters, possibly exceeding that threshold. Morphological characteristics were not completely incorrect, but not completely accurate either. Extremities displayed disproportionate elongation. The torso manifested narrowness, while the shoulder structure achieved width that did not correspond to human weight distribution mechanics. The visible integumentary coloration under firelight appeared nearly white, not the white coloration of disease-afflicted human tissue, the white of mature birch bark, something that eliminated the necessity for concealment through pigmentation because it had never required camouflage, never required protection through concealment. And the ocular structures, I will articulate ocular description because this detail specifically has maintained crystalline clarity throughout my remaining lifespan despite deliberate attempts at psychological suppression. The eyes absorbed firelight from 13 meters distance and retained that illumination with controlled intensity, not animal ocular reflection generating orange or emerald luminescence. These maintained absorbed photons and redirected them with cold quality, amber pigmentation resembling ancient bone material. Positioned extensively wide within the cranial structure, they did not blink throughout the 45 seconds we engaged in mutual observation. I executed no weapons discharge. Corporal Marinkovic, commanding our observation group, elevated his rifle to firing position, but did not execute discharge. We maintained standing orders demanding authorization before weapons deployment. Instinct operated in concert with regulation. Unanimous. Unspoken. We recognized with absolute certainty that weapons discharge would constitute catastrophic mistake. Not because we experienced fear regarding the entity, because we comprehended what would transpire subsequent to offensive action. Fundamental difference exists between those psychological states. The figure sustained its position for 45 seconds, perhaps extending to 50. Then it executed backward locomotion with measured precision, advancing one deliberate step at a time back into the tree, covered region, and illumination surrendered the entity incrementally, 1 meter at a time, until darkness consumed completely, leaving only coniferous forest and absence. We reported immediately. Lieutenant Petrovich registered the encounter documentation. Colonel Vranic proceeded to the northwestern perimeter and maintained stationary observation toward the forest boundary for extended duration. He engaged his left ear manipulation, his established gesture for intensive cognitive processing. He verbalized nothing for approximately 5 minutes. Then he returned to the command post. December 4th, Colonel Vranic compiled correspondence for regional military administration. He utilized careful bureaucratic language. Unknown entities confirmed through reconnaissance. Equine assets lost. Military personnel incapacitated. Status unknown. Causation unspecified. Anomalous ground impressions confirmed. Vocalization phenomena lacking conventional explanation. Observation group reports regarding bipedal entities exceeding standard dimensional parameters. Coordinated perimeter surveillance behaviors indicating organized operational capacity. He abstained from linguistic selections that would have prompted military psychological evaluation of his mental condition. He maintained precision. He maintained control. I believe he allocated substantial mental effort toward word selection. We anticipated administrative response duration of approximately 5 days. The command established parameters communicating 5 additional days positioning within the checkpoint while entities patrolled the surrounding darkness. The administrative communication, when delivered via courier, communicated identical content to the preceding communication. Position retention mandated. Strategic operations continuance required. I observed Colonel Vranic read the message. He demonstrated extended stillness. Subsequently, he communicated to no particular person. We will maintain position through 8 additional days. He delivered the statement in the manner individuals employ when addressing themselves regarding decisions already finalized. Lieutenant Petrovich recorded the statement's date and temporal notation in the log. December 5th through 11th. Intensification period that I will relate with maximum precision because accuracy comprises the single contribution I can offer authentically. Nightly visitations materialized with increasing regularity, never repeating identical locations in sequential order. Northern location, then southwestern location, then northern location again, then eastern location. Always between 20, 100 and 0300 hours. Always 1 or 2 entities positioned at forest boundary within firelight visibility range. Never advancing proximity. Never reducing deliberation. Lieutenant Petrovich's log records every visitation with identical notational format. Entity observed. Location notation. Duration measurement. Behavioral description. Withdrawal acknowledgement. He performed the responsibility of trained observation specialist. Maintaining psychological order through systematic recording. On December 8th, the entity at the southern observation location was accompanied by a smaller form. Not diminished in absolute magnitude. Reduced in measurement, still exceeding 2 meters height, yet with morphological proportions diverging from the full-sized entities, possessing equivalent pale integument and equivalent observation methodology. The Southern Observation Group leadership, Private Gojko Bojic, a former prize boxer from Nis, a physically massive individual, subsequently described the reduced entity as juvenile. He utilized that linguistic classification, then immediately contradicted himself. No, not juvenile. Yet the proportional structure suggested something developmental stage not yet completed, something that had not attained full magnitude parameters. That observation circulated through the checkpoint garrison with velocity exceeding any official communication. December 9th, 7 soldiers from the remaining 50, 7 garrison members refused sentry duty following sunset periods. Colonel Vranic possessed technical authority for severe disciplinary response. In conventional wartime situations, duty refusal constituted grave offense. He examined the 7 soldiers with extended focus. He issued directive directing them to assume interior tasks. Miroslav subsequently communicated that the colonel had privately indicated he would not punish soldiers for rational decision-making. I considered that pronouncement significant coming from a career military commander. The surrounding ecology had undergone substantial modification. The checkpoint structure experienced complete animal avoidance. Not exclusively the horses, which had fled. The avifauna that had occupied the coniferous growth, woodpeckers, jays, finches, various species, vanished completely from observable locations. The forest had cultivated silence that differed from natural winter quiet. It represented the acoustic signature of a landscape that had reorganized its hierarchy, with human soldiers positioned somewhere near the bottom tier. We comprehended our actual status within this ecosystem without requiring verbal articulation. December 11th, the entity breach of checkpoint perimeter. I was not actively stationed on perimeter observation. I was positioned within the eastern barracks structure with 11 additional soldiers engaged in rest period rotation. At approximately 02:30 hours, I achieved consciousness in response to something I could only characterize as acoustic absence. Not silence in conventional sense. Presence of void, an empty space that displaced normal environmental sound. I have invested decades attempting to articulate the distinction conceptually. Wind continued audible. The central fire maintained its crackling acoustic character. Yet underneath these sounds existed a new quietude, as though something enormous remained completely immobile adjacent to our position, and that enormous stillness generated pressure against all surrounding acoustic phenomena. Miroslav, positioned near the barracks entrance structure, communicated almost inaudibly, "Do not execute any movement. Maintain absolute stillness." Not whispered utterance. Breath modified into shape and meaning. Complete garrison immobility. Through the structural gap, where logs had warped throughout the season, I achieved visual access to the checkpoint central clearing beneath lunar illumination. I perceived the figure. It positioned itself within the checkpoint perimeter, standing proximate to the primary fire location's eastern side, approximately 11 meters from my vantage position. Non-moving, standing with dorsal surface partly directed toward the barracks, anterior direction toward the command post. The pale amber ocular structures were not visible from this angular perspective. The pale integument reflected moonlight with complete absence of warmth. The anterior limbs terminated below standard human anatomical positioning. The digits extended to unusual length. The entity maintained this configuration for what I calculated as approximately 5 minutes. Miroslav performed breath-based enumeration. I detected his breath modification moving adjacent to my ear, and I perceived the ongoing count. Subsequently, it executed complete head rotation. Not complete body rotation, exclusively cranial structure, and it directed its ocular attention toward the barracks structure where I lay alongside my companions. It looked toward us. The ocular structures captured moonlight. It comprehended our position. It had comprehended our presence throughout. It demonstrated this comprehension specifically. It rotated its cranial structure back to anterior orientation. It executed 4 lengthy steps directed toward the northern checkpoint boundary. Every step consumed substantial ground distance. It progressed through the checkpoint perimeter, entering forest margin, and darkness consumed it. Complete perimeter penetration duration, 4 to 5 minutes. The entity had not contacted any checkpoint structure, had not inflicted any damage infrastructure, had not executed direct threat against any garrison member. It had penetrated our defensive boundary, examined our position, and withdrawn. That action alone accomplished necessary communication. The entire garrison comprehended the message by dawn observation. Every soldier, those who had witnessed the event directly, and those who had not, understood the implication by the morning moment. Colonel Vranic convened garrison assembly at 06:30 hours. He maintained upright posture. His uniform demonstrated regulation compliance. His facial expression conveyed what I would characterize as professional resolution bordering on something approaching acceptance. He addressed us. An entity of unknown origin penetrated the checkpoint boundary last evening, conducted positional observation, and executed withdrawal. He delivered this statement utilizing the modulation of a military officer reading weather reports. He subsequently declared, "I am implementing immediate tactical withdrawal from checkpoint Kostav, effective beginning of this operational period." He did not communicate withdrawal justification to military command using that specific characterization. Lieutenant Petrovich displayed the official communication draft. Position sustainability evaluation has determined defensive capacity is insufficient relative to the nature of hostile activity and existing resource limitations. Permanent checkpoint decommissioning is recommended. Supply corridor rerouting through alternative valley systems is proposed. The statement represented absolute truth while revealing nothing authentic regarding the actual situation. Military organizations have consistently demonstrated exceptional capability for this particular variance of communication, statements that are factually accurate while expressing none of the underlying reality. We disassembled checkpoint Kastav within 2 hours 40 minutes. Minimal deliberation regarding operational tempo. Men who had demonstrated methodical, deliberate behavior throughout our deployment suddenly mobilized with efficiency, suggesting unanimous collective decision. Equipment received allocation across 2 remaining sledge mechanisms. Tent structures underwent rapid disassembly and bundling. The command post abandoned inventory. The cook fire apparatus underwent complete dismantling. We extinguished all 4 perimeter fire constructions. That action of fire extinguishment felt like threshold crossing, like securing a portal that you comprehend you would never open again. The silence that followed the final fire extinguishment felt absolute. December 12th, 08:15 hours. 58 soldiers and 2 supply sledges commenced southern progression down the valley corridor. The coniferous growth remained proximate on both valley sides throughout the initial 4 kilometers preceding the valley widening. Verbal communication between soldiers remained minimal. Miroslav maintained position adjacent to my walking position and observed the forest margins continuously without apparent anxiety, employing the methodology of a professional herder monitoring his animals. He never communicated what he observed or did not observe within that surrounding forest. On one occasion, perhaps 3 years post-deployment, I submitted written inquiry regarding whether we had maintained observation by the entities during our withdrawal. He responded with written correspondence containing 3 words: "You remained unwatched." We achieved the settlement of Donji Morav by 16:30 hours. Walking duration of 8 hours, with supply sledges across 8 kilometers of valley. The settlement elder positioned himself at the primary road location. He observed our numeric composition. He performed mathematical enumeration. He communicated something through our translator. He stated that 58 soldiers had departed checkpoint Kastav and 58 should express gratitude toward whatever they had offered as compensation for safe transit. Colonel Vranic communicated that he had offered nothing. The elder maintained extended observation toward the colonel without additional verbal response, then withdrew into his dwelling structure. That observation, that silence, it conveyed implication. We dispersed from Donji Morav across the following 48 hours. The checkpoint garrison received formal reassignment. Regional Military Command classified the withdrawal as tactical repositioning responding to force evaluation assessment. Checkpoint Kastav received official designation as decommissioned position due to structural inadequacy and logistical insufficiency. A supply corridor rerouting was established approximately 12 kilometers westward, maintaining sufficient distance to exclude the entire valley system from operational utilization. To my knowledge, military forces have never re-established positioning within the Vukova Gorge. No subsequent efforts have attempted checkpoint re-establishment. The valley remained abandoned by military command permanently after that December withdrawal. I returned to civilian employment in Belgrade. I worked within structural engineering for 34 additional years. I married a woman who worked at the university library. I raised 1 son. I never communicated anything regarding checkpoint Kastav to my wife. Not ever. Not once. She comprehended through the method that spouses understand things communicated through silence, through behavioral modification, through the 1,000 small indicators that suggest something fundamental has transformed. She knew I had experienced something that altered my comprehension of what existed within the world's boundaries. She died in 1982. Following her death, I relocated to Niz with my son and have maintained residence here subsequently. I executed extensive investigation attempting to locate Miroslav Santic following the war's conclusion. I achieved success in 1928. He had returned to forest management work in the southern Carpathian region, maintaining substantial distance from the Vukova Gorge system. He verified everything I had retained in memory across the 14-year interval. He also communicated information he had withheld at the time. He had withheld it, he indicated, because disclosure would have benefited no person. During the evening, when the entity penetrated our checkpoint perimeter, as he observed through the barracks entrance gap, he witnessed the entity approach the command post structure and pause near it. He observed the entity directing extended attention toward the command post configuration. He stated the structure possessed only thin canvas reinforcement. He stated the entity would have comprehended Maksim Vranic's position within that structure. He communicated that the entity manifested extended observation toward the command structure and then executed decision to withdraw rather than penetrate further. That represented mercy, he indicated. That represented the exclusive mercy that was offered. That mercy determination constituted our survival mechanism. Miroslav died in 1951. Lieutenant Petrovich died during the subsequent European conflict. Radosav Lukic, the stoneworker, emigrated to North America in the 1920s, and I lost subsequent contact with him. Of the 58 soldiers who departed checkpoint Kastav on December 12, 1917, I represent the single person I can verify survived to contemporary temporal existence. I have achieved 84 years of life. I have contemplated what I encountered with greater frequency than I have contemplated any other single experience across those 84 years. Individuals of younger generations who hear narratives of this category from older individuals tend to presume that temporal distance diminishes truthfulness, that memory functions as a translation mechanism that deteriorates with each generational transmission, that we reconstruct gaps utilizing narratives we require to believe. That represents reasonable assumption. It is also completely incorrect. The characteristic quality of authentic terror is that it possesses no temporal decay mechanism. The ordinary days of existence fade systematically. The entity in the clearing remains positioned exactly where it was at the moment of observation. The phenomenon of terror does not diminish. The pale amber ocular structures still direct attention. The extended digits still hang below normal positioning. The knowledge that you were assessed and adjudicated worthy of continued existence, that remains with permanent intensity. They possess linguistic designation in the regional mythology. The creatures occupying those mountains at elevations exceeding the permanent snow line. Vorgelak represents the common contemporary designation, the term the elderly woman utilized in Donji Morav. But historical documentation, monastery records from the 14th century, landowner accounting records from the 16th century employ different terminology regarding the massive entities, the ancient specimens, the creatures maintaining territorial control within the high elevation passages. They designate them as Nosferat Primi, the primary predators. These entities differ fundamentally from the village narratives, the stories involving deceased neighbors and violated burial sites. These represent older phenomenon. These predate the communities that surround them. The historical documentation extends back toward the 15th century, possibly further. Organized behavioral patterns, territorial maintenance, non-predatory interaction with human organisms excluding circumstances of boundary violation or deliberate provocation. Patience. Approximately once each generation, some human organization attempts extension into the Vukova Gorge territory, and the historical record updates with supplemental notation. The military command in 1917, a geological analysis expedition in 1930, that abandoned all equipment without explanation regarding their surveying objectives. A group of mountaineers in 1960 who reported unusual phenomena and received administrative guidance to avoid written documentation or official report submission. The mountains remain. The valley remains. The entities that reside within remain. I possess comprehension regarding what they are, and I possess comprehension regarding what they have always been. I possess only the information that my own observation acquired during October and November of 1917. And what I witnessed was this, something that existed in temporal terms before Romania contained administrative designations. Something that predates the application of formal geographic nomenclature to these mountain systems. Something standing beneath moonlight within our checkpoint clearing and observing us with patience radiating from ancient amber optical structures and rendering decision regarding our continued survival. We withdrew because a military commander who had endured 2 separate warfare campaigns determined that tactical withdrawal represented the correct decision against opposition that could not be engaged through any available military mechanism. He was correct in this assessment. We withdrew. The entities remained. This comprises the fundamental understanding of how the arrangement operates, and it has functioned equivalently since the 15th century initial documentation. The mountains will persist longer than every one of us. Everything residing within those mountains persists beyond human temporal frameworks. The wilderness always achieves victory. I have experienced requests throughout the decades regarding whether we should have implemented combat response, whether we should have attempted defensive engagement or offensive operational capacity against the entities. The response is definitively negative, and I will articulate the reasoning. Combat engagement necessitates opposition force that achieves vulnerability through engagement. Combat requires circumstances where one organizational structure can establish supremacy through superior tactical implementation or resource application. What we confronted was not conquerable. What we confronted was not vulnerable to military methodology. It was older than human organizational structures. It was patient in manner, suggesting that patience itself appears inadequate as descriptive terminology. Patient precisely as stone mountains remain patient. Patient as geological processes remain patient. It existed permanently. It would exist permanently. The appropriate behavioral response was exactly the response we implemented. Respectful recognition. Boundary withdrawal. The comprehension that certain geographic regions are not intended for human territorial control. In the subsequent decades, I have attempted reading everything available regarding the mountain systems. The monastery documentation from the medieval period that references Nosferat Primi entities, 16th century landowner accounts, the folklore evolution across temporal periods. The consistent pattern demonstrates itself clearly. These entities establish and maintain territorial parameters within elevated regions. They do not extend operational range substantially below permanent snowline elevation. They appear to maintain comprehension of human settlement patterns and human movement corridors. They appear to tolerate human existence below specific altitude thresholds and within designated transit systems. But direct penetration into their core territory triggers reaction that demonstrates patience, but also absolute inevitability. The reaction manifests as observation, the consistent sensation of being assessed and evaluated for threat status, and subsequently, judgment and decision. Sometimes that judgment culminates in fatality. Sometimes it results in expulsion. Sometimes, as with our situation, it communicates release. That singular instance of mercy regarding Colonel Vranic and the command tent structure. What generates maximum disturbance in my reflection is the absence of official acknowledgement regarding these historical encounters. How thoroughly the silence has functioned. The geological expedition that abandoned instruments and equipment without filing explanation. The mountaineers in 1960 who received administrative instruction regarding communication suppression. How many additional encounters have experienced quiet administration without official documentation? How many soldiers, travelers, hermits, naturalists have encountered Nosferat Primi entities and selected silence? How comprehensive does this silence extend? That question has haunted me beyond the actual encounter itself. Not the primal fear of that evening, rather the comprehension that I represent merely one voice among countless others who have encountered these phenomena and selected to disappear into ordinary existence without testimony. My mortality now approaches completeness. I am 84 years old. Medical assessment suggests limited remaining temporal duration. Perhaps 1 year, perhaps longer. Complete uncertainty. Following my physical conclusion, no remaining person will exist who occupied checkpoint to Stav during that December. No person will persist who felt the atmospheric weight of something substantial moving through our perimeter. No survivor will exist who observed the pale amber optical apertures focused upon human soldiers from within darkness and comprehended without doubt that judgment regarding our continued existence was being finalized. Miroslav has departed. Lieutenant Petrovich has departed. Radosav has likely departed, though I cannot verify with certainty. Colonel Vranic expired long ago. I represent the final individual. I represent the final voice maintaining capacity to communicate with certainty regarding what occurred within the Vukova Gorge during those terrible weeks. I have contemplated repeatedly what approach I will adopt regarding this testimony. Whether suppression represents the appropriate choice, permitting silence to consume this account as it has consumed so many others. Whether I should permit governmental authority to continue the historical suppression by accessing this document after my conclusion. Whether I should communicate authentically regarding what occurred, accepting that people will dismiss it as elderly memory degradation. Whether documentation should be destroyed, enabling the silence to persist indefinitely. Whether transmission should occur, establishing permanent record of truth despite the truth's inability to generate preventative impact. I have determined transparency represents the correct course of action, regardless of consequence. The truth possesses inherent value even when truth cannot generate practical alteration of circumstances. Even if the truth remains unable to prevent subsequent individuals from traversing into the Vukova Gorge and confronting equivalent judgment from Nosferat Primi entities. At minimum, the truth will persist in documented form. At minimum, records will establish what occurred. At minimum, someone will comprehend that specific events transpired. I have implemented maximum precision possible in this testimony. I have communicated information that existed within my direct observation capacity. I have articulated interpretation that my 70 years of analysis have generated. Everything else remains beyond my legitimate domain. I do not possess awareness regarding what happens subsequent to my mortality. Whether silence will restore itself, whether subsequent researchers will locate this testimony, or whether authorities will implement systematic suppression. Whether this document will remain accessible for examination or whether classifications will return. I have implemented what actions remain within my capacity. I have communicated truth utilizing the vocabulary available to me. I have offered information that decades of psychological processing have established. I have provided caution. Everything else transcends my individual authority. What I can state with absolute certainty is that Nosferat Primi entities exist within those elevated mountain regions. What I can state with absolute certainty is that they maintain territorial parameters within the Vukova Gorge system and adjacent elevation. What I can state with absolute certainty is that they demonstrate intelligence, coordinated function, patience, and complete capacity for lethal action. What I can state with absolute certainty is that they do not execute indiscriminate predation on human organisms. What I can state with absolute certainty is that they enforce boundary specifications and impose consequences for boundary violation. What I can state with absolute certainty is that conventional military response mechanisms demonstrate inadequacy against them. What I can state with absolute certainty is that Colonel Vranic's decision regarding defensive withdrawal represented the correct tactical decision, and that his assessment regarding the situation was accurate. Beyond those statements, I cannot provide additional information. I cannot communicate what their fundamental nature represents. I cannot articulate point of origin. I cannot communicate whether they possess human evolutionary connection or whether they originated from completely different evolutionary pathway. I cannot articulate whether they persist in contemporary temporal existence, or whether they will disappear. I can only communicate what my own ocular perception documented. I can only express what my consciousness experienced. I can only state that this experience transformed my fundamental comprehension regarding what exists within the world's parameters and what coexists with human civilization unacknowledged. I have maintained this knowledge across my entire life. I have maintained consciousness of what I experienced despite 70 years of deliberate suppression attempts. I have carried this information until I reached age consideration, where continued silence represented something approaching complicity. Now that I have achieved advanced age, I am communicating this testimony to document what I witnessed. I do not anticipate universal acceptance. I do not expect my testimony to generate practical transformation regarding how civilization operates. I do not expect authority structures to issue formal declaration regarding the Vukova Gorge as protected territory or to communicate official guidance regarding Nosferat Primi entities. I expect what historically occurs with equivalent testimonies: doubt, dismissal, rationalization operating from assumption that elderly memory deteriorates, the presupposition that everything I documented can receive explanation through conventional mechanisms. Predator animals, psychological hallucination, altitude-generated cognitive dysfunction. I expect these rationalization processes because I have observed their operation across multiple identical testimonial circumstances. I have witnessed silence function with remarkable effectiveness. I have observed suppression succeed consistently. I have witnessed rationalization operate comprehensively. I am communicating this testimony regardless of anticipatory resistance because truth deserves to exist somewhere. There should be something permanent. There should be documentation. There should be acknowledgement that specific occurrences transpired regardless of dismissal. I am communicating because someone traveling within the Vukova Gorge region at some future temporal moment might recognize something within my characterization of the entities and might achieve comprehension that saves that person's existence. That represents the exclusive contribution I can offer. That represents the exclusive service I can perform. A warning. Description of visual characteristics. Documentation of temporal sequence. Statement that the wilderness is not empty and that something within that wilderness possesses intelligence and patience and permanent observation. I have spent decades contemplating what Colonel Vranic witnessed when Miroslav communicated the details regarding that terminal encounter. The command tent possessed only thin canvas reinforcement. The entity positioned itself outside the structure. The entity would have comprehended the colonel's location. The entity directed visual attention toward that specific structure. The entity could have penetrated the structure and executed the colonel if such action had served the entity's interest. The entity executed different decision. The entity maintained external positioning. The entity demonstrated decision-making regarding proportional response. That action was not weakness manifestation. That action represented not inability to terminate the colonel. That action comprised the entity communicating something without linguistic expression. There was law being observed. There was boundary recognition. The colonel had removed his soldiers from the valley system. The colonel had demonstrated territorial respect. The colonel had declined escalatory action. The entity assessed the colonel and determined that termination would exceed appropriate response. That action comprises mercy. That single instance of mercy served as the mechanism that preserved all of our lives. That represented the only mercy that was offered, and it determined whether we lived. We lived, and across 70 years I have maintained comprehension of why we survived. I have contemplated whether military ordination should have followed my experience. Whether I should have directed my existence toward religious service, toward spiritual practice that might have incorporated what I witnessed into comprehensible theological framework. I did not select that course of action. I returned to structural engineering. I lived with unremarkable quality. I performed the exact actions that Colonel Vranic executed. I comprehended what occurred and advanced forward into ordinary existence. I executed the behavior that every soldier who has experienced phenomena beyond explanation has implemented. I integrated it internally. I transported it with me. I maintained silence until I achieved sufficient age that silence became impossible to maintain. This represents my complete communication. This comprises what I maintain regarding what I encountered. An individual of 84 years, living in a residential structure in Nis, Yugoslavia, communicating this testimony because I can no longer sustain silence. The mountains continue existence. The valley continues existence. What resides within those mountains has always existed there and will continue existing there. The world extends beyond what human comprehension typically encompasses. The darkness contains entities that are patient and intelligent and utterly indifferent to human organizational concerns. And somewhere within the Carpathian Mountain system, Nosferat Primi entities traverse elevated passages and preserve territorial boundaries against human intrusion. They have executed this function across centuries. They will execute this function across subsequent centuries. The wilderness always maintains victory. That represents absolute certainty. Everything else remains subordinate to that fact.